Dear friends, welcome to today's online problem solving session organized by Maths aspirants. We have Mr. Harinarayan with us to discuss the continuation of Riemann integration. As you know, Harinarayan is now doing PhD at ISER Tirupati and he has done his MSc from Cochin University of Science and Technology. So I welcome Hari to this class. Also, I extend warm welcome to all participants. Let us hope that the session will be really fruitful and helpful for you.
Okay. So anyway, last time we really didn't do much. We only did some problems and kind of started, but it was not in a what's to say in a proper way to teach. So I'll just recall the basics and quickly go into. Okay, so this is what we are gonna do. So today's topic is Riemann integration. So Riemann and still just. Steel, steel just spelling is STIEL. Steel just integration. And first we are gonna go through the basics. Like in the basics we'll see what is the definition and when it will be Riemann integrable. Second, we'll see the types of function. What are the, some types of functions which are types of functions which are integrable. And then we'll see some functions which are not are integrable. And some properties of, it's not properly in order, and some properties of Riemann integration and some examples. And last time we did some simple examples like integral of x squared and x cubed. So today we'll do maybe sine or cos or something like that. Okay, so and just like I told last time, it's supposed to be an interactive session. So whenever you have a doubt, please make sure you unmute yourself and ask me. I won't be looking at the comments, so I won't know if you put a comment. So make sure you just unmute yourself and ask the doubt if you have any. And yeah, you can always stop me and add to whatever I'm saying, and everything else stays the same. Okay, so we'll start. So first we have something called a partition. We have definition of partition. So if you have an interval AB, a partition is just this. You consider A as x0 and then points x1, x2, ... xn minus 1 less than xn equals b. So this is a partition. So these are the partition points, and we call this set of points a partition of AB. And we use the notation delta xi equals xi minus xi minus 1, where I can be any of the 0 to n, actually 1 to n. Okay, now you consider function f on real valued bounded function. F you call it real valued bounded function on AB. Then corresponding to the partitions xi, delta xi, you consider these numbers, capital Mi as a supremum of fx and small mi as infimum of fx, where x is always in, we choose x to be in xi minus 1 comma xi. Okay, so this is how we define define capital Mi and small I. Then we have this particular notation UPF, which is upper sum of partition P with respect to the function f as summation I equal to 1 to n capital Mi delta xi and LPF as summation over I equal to 1 to n small mi delta xi. Okay, so these numbers depends on the partition and the function, of course. And we define upper integral or and lower integral, which are the supremum and infimum. So you consider set of all partitions of of AB and consider this number. We denote this number dx as infimum of UPF, where P runs over the partition. P is a partition of, P is a partition of X. P is a partition of AB. And this AB f dx, we consider it to be infimum or partitions of LPF. No, supreme of. LPF is lower sum, so supreme of that. Supreme of LPF, where P runs over all the partitions. So you consider these two numbers. Of course, these two numbers exist because this UPF set of UPF with P ranging over the partitions and LPF, these are all finite sets and they have bounds. Hence, you have these two numbers, right? These two numbers exist. Now, we say that a function f is Riemann integrable. Okay. We say that a function is f is definition Riemann integrable or integrable. So we say f is R integrable. Of course, we assume f to be, we already have assumed f to be bounded and what is that called? Real valued are integrable. If you have these two numbers to be equal, integral AB f dx equals integral AB f dx. If you have these two numbers to be equal, we call the number to be Riemann integrable, and this equal number we just represent it as integral from A to B f dx. This is the Riemann integral of f over this interval AB. So this is the definition. This is how we'll be defining it. Okay, and we just instead of saying f is R integrable, we just say f is in R or RAB. If the interval is obvious for us, we just call f in R. Okay, so I'll interchangeably use it. Okay, so now we make some observations. First, we assume that f is a bounded function, right? If f is a bounded function, then you can find real numbers, small m and capital M, such that capital M is an upper bound and small m is the lower bound of fx at fx in AB. Now, I can actually see that you have this particular inequality. If I multiply m with a times b, for example, if you consider that function, you can actually see this inequality b minus a, will be actually bounded below by every lower sum. You consider any partition P, then I can actually see that M times B minus A is a lower bound for LPF. Let me know if I'm going too fast. I mean, these are, I suppose these you may have seen. If you haven't seen, I can give a small idea how it goes. Otherwise, we'll just continue. Okay. And in every partition, I mean, given in a partition, we actually have this. Actually, you don't really have to be given a partition. Even otherwise, you actually can see that LPF is always bounded by UPF. So given any partition P1 and given any other partition P2, I actually have this inequality LP1F is bounded by UP2F. So it doesn't matter what P1 and P2 is, but this always works. So that is there. I mean, you can intuitively know that, or if you want to see, I can give a idea of proof. And this UPF will be bounded above by M times the length of the interval. Okay, so essentially this shows that this this sets LPF and UPF are bounded. Hence, this kind of gives you the idea. I mean, this is the reason to define these two numbers. I mean, I'm just randomly taking infimum of a set of real numbers. We don't know if it is bounded or not, right? So this number, I mean, this particular notation may not make sense. But in this particular case, for us, it makes sense because of this inequality. So it's just a justification for that. Okay, so we have the bounds. And of course, so this kind of says that LPF, the integral A B f dx is always greater than LPF, right? Because it's the supremum. So essentially you have that UPF, the infimum of UPF will be below all of the UPFs, right? F dx A B. So we have all these inequalities, and due to these numbers being the limits, you can actually see this also. So for showing that it is equal, or you only have to show that there is some LPF which you can say that is greater than or equal to, or any other way. Okay, so let's continue. So this you call upper integral and lower integral. Okay, fine. Now we go to Stieltjes part. So for that we have a new thing. You consider this alpha. So it's a definition. So you consider alpha to be a monotonically increasing function. Monotone increasing R-valued function. Function on AB, of course. Now we assume that it is bounded, of course. We assume and let alpha be bounded. This means that alpha A and alpha B are finite. Okay. Now, for you consider partition P of alpha. Consider partition P of AB, my bad. Then we consider, we say this notation, delta alpha I is alpha of xi minus alpha of xi minus 1. So this is analogous to delta xi. So delta xi was what? You had xi minus xi minus 1. So this delta xi is actually nothing but delta alpha I, where alpha is your identity function. Identity function, which is f of x equal to x, where x in AB. Because we are fixing the domain. So right. So Yeah, so x is a monotone increasing function. We are not asking it to be strictly increasing. Okay, so that's an important thing to see. So we are only asking for an increasing function. So alpha is a monotone increasing function where it is a bounded increasing function. And yeah, we have this definition. Now we again, just like we defined LPF and UPF, you define UPF alpha and LPF alpha. So here UPF alpha, it is just summation. There you had mi delta xi. So in this case, instead of delta xi, we consider delta alpha I. I of course equal to 1 to n. And LPF alpha. This is not D, okay, this is P. My handwriting is a bit messy. Summation small mi delta alpha I. Right. Now again, we consider the lower and upper integrals. Integral from A to B. F d alpha is infimum of UPF alpha, and integrally B lower sum with respect to alpha is supremum of LPF alphas. Okay, and we say that if they are equal, this Riemann-Stieltjes integral with respect to alpha, f is Riemann-Stieltjes integrable if you have integral AB f d alpha equals integral A B f d alpha, and the common number you write it as A to B f d alpha. Okay, so this is called Riemann-Stieltjes integral or just Stieltjes integral, anything people say that interchangeably. And just like we used to say f in R, in this case we say f in R alpha. So it essentially gives you which function it is. So if I'm just writing alpha, it just means alpha R, it means you have alpha equal to identity function. Okay. Now, yeah, of course, in these cases, fx and or you have the variable of integration doesn't matter. And yeah, it's up to us. The variable of integration, you can write x or y, doesn't matter. All these things, I suppose you know. And what else is there to see? Now, for partitions, for these things were for a single partition. For calculations, you can't really work with a single partition, but we may have to make the partitions bigger, smaller, and all, and we may have to compare two partitions. In those cases, we have something called a refinement of partitions. So, partition refinement. So assume you have a partition P. If P is a partition of AB, we say P star is a refinement. P star is a refinement of P if you have all the partition points of P in P star, which is to say I have P is contained in P star. Okay, so if you have more partition points than P, we call that it is a refinement, of course. And if you have two partitions, P1 and P2, if P1 and P2 are partitions, then there is something that we always use. It's called a common refinement. So common refinement is something which have partition points of both of them. So we should have P star is common refinement of P1 and P2 if you have P1 union P2 is contained in P star. You can actually consider P1 union P2 itself as the common refinement, as you have both of them in it. So during calculations, you can as well take P1, just P1 union P2. Okay. And yeah, for LPF alphas and refinements, you have a nice property. I mean, this is why you have something called something in line with sequence. So in this case, it is net. So we have this partition, let theorem. It's a theorem. Let P star be a refinement of P. Then we have this particular inequalities. LPF alpha is bounded above by LP star F alpha, and UPF alpha is bounded below by UP star F alpha. So this is essentially saying that as we are refining, if we refine a partition, we'll actually get a smaller number for upper sum and a bigger number for lower sum. Essentially, you have that. Earlier we had that bounding Walla equation. So if you just see both of them together, you can actually see this, right? So LPF alpha is bounded above by LP star F alpha, and here you have your integrals, and that will live out for now. And we always know that LPF is greater than UPF, UP star F alpha, and here you have UPF alpha. So each time we are actually having a what's that called? Each time you are having a refinement, you are actually making the numbers smaller and smaller. I mean, not smaller and smaller, closer and closer, so to say. Okay, so of course, if any of you want to see why this happens, we can see it, or I can just say that if you are putting more points, it will actually in this case, you can look at what happens to the MIs, small MIs. And in this case, you can see what happens to the capital MIs for that interval. For example, if you have, let's say, AB, and you have maximum, if you have the maxima to be capital M, and if you divide it into two parts, let's say AC and CB, and what happens to the maximas. So here you will have two maximas, let's say M1 and M2, and you always have M1 is less than or equal to M and M2 is less than or equal to M, right? So this actually gives you that earlier this partition would have given this number, M times A minus B. But now this partition, the refined partition, will give you this M1 times C minus A. Okay, this is B minus A, my bad. M1 times C minus A plus M2 times B minus C. So you can kind of see that this is bigger than this. So this is the reason for this to happen, and similarly for minimas it will be the other way, hence you will get this inequality. Okay, if you want to look it more closely, we can do it, or essentially this is what we are extending. Okay, so as I said, does anyone have anything to ask till now? Okay, I suppose no. Okay, so this is the property of having a refinement. Now, yeah, of course, these things, I mean, seeing this particular refinement will actually enable us to give the proof of this. Where is it? I mentioned that lower sum is usually bigger than upper sum, right? So yeah, if you want to put a less than or equal to here, you actually need this partition definition. Okay. So using this, you can see that. Okay. Now, we had already said that if the definition of Riemann integrable function. So we say f is in R alpha if we have integral a to b f d alpha equals integral a from f to b f d alpha. So upper integral equal to lower integral. This is our definition. So from this, a similar some Cauchy criterion kind of thing we can derive. That is this theorem. So f in R alpha, if and only if for every epsilon positive, there exists partition P. There exists partition P of AB. Of course, I'm assuming f to be a function of AB and everything is in place. Okay. So you need this UPF alpha minus LPF alpha to be bounded by epsilon. Essentially, usually you put a modulus, but you don't really need that because you know that upper sum is always greater than lower sum. So it's a positive number. So if you can bound this, if given an error, you can actually find a partition for which upper sum and lower sum are equal except for this error. Then you can say that the function is Riemann integrable or still just integrable. Okay, so it's if and only if part is not that hard. All you have to do is this. So if we have both things to be equal, the definition of supremum and infimum will actually give you this. Essentially, you can consider some epsilon by 2 or something. And if you actually have this definition, then you can consider epsilon to be something epsilon and to converge somewhere and say that UPF and LPF have a this UPF minus LPF, you can find P star such that this sequence converges to 0. Hence the what's that called? Infima and suprema becomes equal. Okay. Fine. So if it's not clear, please stop me and ask. If it's clear, we can move. I mean, there are places where you consider this as the definition, but anything is fine. If you consider infimum equal to supremum, same as this. Okay. Fine, let's continue. Now there are some properties. I mean, once you see this, see the point of this partitions is this, because we actually are defining the Riemann integrability as existence of infima and suprema and they being equal, right? But having an infima or suprema directly is not something that we can ask for. It's not, it may not be feasible. So we can always look for partitions, and this LPF given a partition, finding LPF alpha and UPF alpha are possible. These are computable things, right? So actually this gives you something which is doable. It's computable. This is possible in computation. Now that's why this partitions and refinement of partitions are important. Now using the property of partition and this particular definition, you can see some nice things, such that if you have a particular partition P which satisfies this above equation, I mean such that UPF and LPF have are near, I mean at most epsilon far, then if then you can actually say that any refinement will also have this particular property, right? I mean it's kind of obvious from this particular theorem, right? I mean that's what we kind of noted here. So if LP epsilon and UPF alpha, okay, sorry, LPF alpha and UPF alpha are epsilon near, then of course LP star F alpha and UP star F alpha should also be epsilon near, right? So it's as simple as that. So if you have a partition which gives you this inequality with epsilon, any refinement will give you that. And oh, yeah, okay. So that's the important part. And of course, it will be as the same thing will also, this epsilon bound will also work for the difference between UPF and the integral also. Of course, that's understandable because integral will always be in between UPF and LPF for every partition, right? So once you have this particular thing, you can kind of say that integral f d alpha will be in an epsilon ball of u p alpha or LPF alpha, right? So we can kind of approximate the integral. Okay. Now what? So we saw some, these are the properties. Now we'll some big class of functions which are Riemann integrable. I mean, instead of without even checking for all these things, we can directly say that. So okay, these functions are Riemann integrable. So one of the actually main class, a major class of function which are Riemann integrable is the are continuous function. So theorem, it says f is if f is continuous on closed interval AB, then f in R alpha on AB, of course, right? So this is something not that hard to see. So it happens due to this. For either, so of course we are considering alpha. So alpha can be any monotone increasing function. So if you prove it for any alpha, it's easy to see for identity function. So if you are not comfortable with alpha, or if this is the first time seeing Stieltjes integral and you don't want to really look into it, then you can, as I said, whenever I say alpha, you can think about the identity function, and whenever else I say delta alpha, you can just think about delta xi. I mean, it's same. So instead of that, for you, the theorem will be f will be Riemann integrable. That's all. It's not gonna give much of a difference. Okay. So essentially, we are saying a continuous functions are Riemann integrable. Now, why is that? Why does that happen? So for that, what do we have to do? We are gonna the idea of proof goes like this, right? So we are gonna of course the thing which can be computed is that where you can reduce the error between LPF and UPF, right? So that's what we are gonna use here. So for that, we fix an epsilon positive, and with that, you actually choose an eta. I mean, we need a number eta positive which satisfies this particular property. So alpha b minus alpha a times eta. I want this to be, this is eta, not n, eta bounded by epsilon. So, I mean, if alpha is identity, then this is just b minus a, right? So I want b minus a times some number less than epsilon. Usually, if you are considering numbers and all, you will consider a natural number such that, I mean, natural number n in n such that b minus a by n is bounded by epsilon. So it's something, I mean, it's exactly, I mean, very similar to that. So instead of taking a natural number n and considering this, so here I write it by b minus a times 1 by n, and this 1 by n I'll take it as eta, and here instead of b minus a, here b minus a you are actually considering identity function. So instead of that, I'll just consider alpha times b minus alpha times a. So essentially it's the same thing. Maybe the proof you may have already seen, but still. Okay, so you have this, you consider this number, this exists because whatever this number is, I can actually just divide it, divide epsilon by alpha b minus alpha a, which is a positive number, and take something, and I know that that is positive, hence I can take a number less than 0, less than something by epsilon by alpha b minus alpha a. So I'm saying all this to say that it's possible to choose such an eta. Okay, so if this is positive, so I can always find something in between. So I choose that eta. Okay, good. Now that I have this eta, continuity in closed interval AB is same as uniform continuity. So here we are invoking a theorem. Invoke idea that if f continuous in a compact, I mean closed interval AB, plus f is uniform continuous in AB. Right. So what's the good thing about uniform continuity? So continuity at each point, given any epsilon, each point delta may vary, but uniform continuity delta, I mean the error around the domain remains the same. So that's what uniform continuity is. So if it is just continuity, error around, not error, the choice, possibility of choices. So that's what I call error. Error around a point actually depends on the point, but if it's uniform continuous, it remains the same. Okay. So due to this uniform continuity, I can choose the distance delta such that delta can choose delta such that if x minus t less than delta implies fx minus ft less than epsilon. No, sorry, less than eta. Okay, now you may start seeing where we are going. So essentially, if I have x minus t less than eta, and here you have that the alpha b minus alpha a times eta is less than epsilon, then you may start getting the ideas now itself. So the point is exactly this. Everywhere, as you have this particular identity, I have in every alpha, in every partition intervals xi plus 1, I have this particular thing, right? Mi minus small mi is actually less than, is actually bounded by eta, because for every x you have this. So for maxima and minima also we have this. Hence, what will be the difference LPF minus UPF? Sorry, UPF minus LPF. UPF alpha minus LPF alpha will be just summation over capital Mi minus small mi times delta alpha I. In your case, maybe delta xi, doesn't matter. And of course, this delta Mi minus Mi is bounded by eta, hence I can substitute that and write summation over eta I delta alpha I. It's the same as, sorry, eta summation delta alpha I, and summation delta alpha is just your alpha b minus alpha I because it's a monotone increasing function. So essentially you have this bounded by, it is actually equal to, so here you have a bound, of course that bound is from here, it's not equal, yeah, it is equal to, and equal to we are getting a bound, and here you have equal to, which is same as and eta times alpha b minus alpha I, of course, which is less than epsilon by our assumption. Hence, we just proved that LPF minus UPF of alpha is bounded by epsilon. So essentially, it's not the continuity, it's a uniform continuity which we are getting for free from the continuity, which helps us. Okay, so that is one nice class of functions, which is continuous functions on AB. Okay, now there is another class of functions which is not as nice, but still pretty nice, and it have many other properties. So that class of function is monotone functions. So again, continuous functions were Riemann integrable. Similarly, we'll have that monotone functions are also Riemann integrable. So if f is monotone in AB, and of course, in this case, we actually need alpha to be continuous. So one of them I choose to be continuous. So you can actually see that it is almost like the previous thing, right? So f is monotone and alpha is continuous. Here we are essentially doing something similar. So f is continuous and eta is, and alpha is monotone. So it's, the proof is same. Alpha is continuous. Then again, implies f is in R alpha. So if you are only considering Riemann integration, it's fine, right? Because identity function is always continuous. So f is, if f is monotone, then f is Riemann integrable. Okay.
Yeah.
So the,
Sorry,
yeah, yes, sir.
1 minute. See, we need to concentrate on stages part, because majority of them are beginning students. They have studied only the Riemann integration. So I think it is better to concentrate on that part and solve it.
Yeah, I mean, I was also thinking about that, but then I saw that JAM may actually have SteelJS part. I mean, I heard that JAM may have. Okay, so I'll just forget about the SteelJS part then. Okay, so I'll forget about the SteelJS part. Okay, thank you. I'll keep that in mind. So we'll forget about this. So we'll just say if f is monotone, then f is Riemann integrable. So why does that happen? Okay, and so it comes out to be, the idea is same as the previous one, but we'll do it again. Okay, so of course, so what do? We consider n, natural number n, such that such that 1 by n, which is equal to b by a. Sorry, I consider this number b by a by n, and I want to make this thing pretty small, right? This is what I want to do. And you consider mi is if you have xi comma xi plus 1, you have capital M, mi is f of xi, and okay, we are assuming the function to be decreasing. So for now, if you are considering it to be decreasing, then maxima will be the first point attained at first point, and minima will be attained at the second point, xi plus 1, right? Now the point is I can actually choose n to make this number pretty small, right? Now page after. Okay, so now what will be the difference between LPF and UPF? LPF, sorry, UPF minus LPF will be just this, right? Summation capital Mi delta xi minus small mi delta xi, which is same as summation capital Mi minus small mi times delta xi. Now this we know that the function have its maxima at A and minima at B. I mean global maxima of function, maxima at, okay, write this here itself, as f is monotone. For now we are assuming decreasing, doesn't matter. I have that fx is bounded above by f of a and bounded below by f of b, right? Now our idea is this. So we want this to, I want to take this out and write this as b by a, right? So that's what I want to do. So capital Mi minus 1, if I can, if it's possible for me to write it as to give a bound. So what bound will I give? I can give the bound as it should be lesser than this bound, right? I can say that Mi minus Mi, small mi, will always be less than or equal to Fb minus Fa. Essentially, I just want to bound this as a single number. Now, what do you do? If I consider this bound, then from here, I can continue, right? Is bounded above by Fb minus Fa times summation delta xi. Now, summation delta xi is essentially sorry. Yeah. Okay, good. Epsilon by n, we choose. Where did I bound it? Bounded it, right? Okay, sorry. Here, okay, so my mistake. So here it's actually, I was planning to bound it. I didn't do this properly, I suppose. So here I wanted to, here I had the bounds for alpha. Okay, we don't have alpha, so b minus a by n. I am finding n such that, okay. Okay, sorry. So I'm partitioning it in a okay, I'm partitioning it uniformly such that delta xi is actually b minus a by n for for any number, and here in the end delta xi, yeah, in this case instead of this summation mi, I'll be instead of bounding this, I have this to be uniform. So sorry, so you forget about this for now. And so summation capital Mi minus small mi times delta xi. This delta xi I have same, so I can take it outside. So this delta xi equals b minus a by n, right? So it will be b minus a by n times summation mi minus small mi. And as this summation mi minus small mi actually cancels out each other, because this is capital f of, it will be just f of xi minus f of xi plus 1. Right, so this will cancel out each other and it will just b minus a by n times. So this is same as, and this will cancel out each other and you will get it as fa minus fb. Right. Now, if we b minus a times fa minus fb is a constant, right? Whatever the partition is, you have that b minus a times fa minus fb is a constant. Now, with whatever epsilon is, we can find n such that 1 by n times this number is bounded by epsilon. So, our idea is just this. We will choose n large enough so that b minus a times fa minus fb is actually less by n is less than or equal to epsilon. So essentially this will give you that the function is Riemann integrable, right? I mean, all we are doing is this, we are making the partition very small. So with respect to that partition, I mean, we can see that it only depends on the how many partition members we have. So yeah, if we make the partition small enough, then we can make the difference between upper bound and upper sum and lower sum as small as we can. So this is the idea. Okay. Is that okay? Is that okay? So we have, till now we have seen two classes of function which are Riemann integrable. First one is continuous. Second one is monotone. Monotone can be increasing or decreasing, of course, and we don't have need strict monotone or anything, just monotone. Now, this integration have a very nice properties. So yeah, so first let's see some properties of integration first, then we'll go on to this. So some properties of integration. So if you have f and f is Riemann integrable and g is Riemann integrable, then you can actually see that f plus or minus g is actually Riemann integrable. So it's nothing hi-fi, you just put the consider the partitions where you have the it less than epsilon. I mean, f and g are Riemann integrable will mean that you have partitions which will make the error small enough. Now f plus g, you consider a common partition. I mean, not common partition, common refinement. And there you can see what happens to f plus g and f minus g. So it's as simple as that. Actually, you only need to do f plus g. F minus g you will see later. And so that is this. And second part is if you have c, a real number, and f is Riemann integrable, f is Riemann integrable, then you have that cf is actually Riemann integrable. Now, this and previous one together will say that f minus g is Riemann integrable, of course. And you have one more nice thing, that if f and g are Riemann integrable, then you also have f times g to be Riemann integrable. So this is also something nice. So it's the proof of this is not by, I mean, you can, maybe you will be able to do it by refinements also, but there's an easier way to do it. Yeah, for that, we'll need something more. So assume you have, we saw some two classes of functions which are Riemann integrable, right? And from that classes and using these properties, you can make more Riemann integrable functions. And let's see something more. So assume you have this a continuous function phi. First assume that f is a Riemann integrable function. Then assume that you have a function phi, which is continuous. Okay, if f is Riemann integrable, we are assuming that f is bounded. Of course, we have f is bounded. Then assume the bounds of f to be this. So let small m less than fx less than capital M for every x in AB. So f is bounded and m, capital M and smaller m the bounds. And let phi be continuous in small m capital M. Okay, so you have a continuous function in small m capital M. Then you can consider this function, right? The composition phi composite f, which is essentially phi of f of x. It's again a function from AB, right? So it's a function from AB. Phi f. We are saying this composition is actually Riemann integrable in AB, of course. So if you have a Riemann integrable function, and if you have a continuous function, and then this continuous function should be, I mean, we are considering it to be continuous in the range of f. Essentially, this upper bound and lower bound essentially means you just need some range. Essentially, all we need to do is this: we should be able to make sense of this particular definition, right? The composition should make sense. So if this composition makes sense, then the composition is actually Riemann integrable. So that's something nice. So this will give you a lot more Riemann integrable functions, right? For example, this will directly say that if f is Riemann integrable, then I can directly say that f square is Riemann integrable, right? So so we want to prove f times g is Riemann integrable. For that, what we do is this. So we know that f plus g is Riemann integrable, and from the previous thing, we can say that f plus g whole square is Riemann integrable. Similarly, we know that f minus g is Riemann integral, and the square is also Riemann integrable, and the difference should also be Riemann integrable. So have this. This is essentially 4 times fg. So from the properties of Riemann integration, you will get that fg is also Riemann integrable. Now, of course, I just stated that this is Riemann integrable, and proving this is not that hard, because all you have to do is again consider refinements and continuity of, I mean, if this is if f is Riemann integrable, you can actually find the refinements which gives you a very small interval, and this continuous, I mean, phi being continuous in m, small m capital M, gives you that it is a uniform continuous function. And use in each in the particular partition, you look at the you can make a partition of xi, where this f of xi minus f of xj can be made smaller using the uniform continuity, and that in turn will give you that the composition is actually Riemann integrable. So if you want to see it, I can do it. Otherwise, we'll just continue. I mean, whatever I said, I'll just write it down. That's all. It's nothing more. So should I be explaining it more?
Yeah, you can skip Harry. That proof can
Okay.
be skipped.
Okay, I'll skip that. Okay, so essentially we got that product of Riemann integrable functions is again Riemann integrable. Now, what else? We have almost all of the properties, and of course, if you consider modulus of function, it is again Riemann integrable because modulus absolute value function is again continuous. And yeah, you don't need a, okay, fine. And if you have, yeah, okay, I'll just tell this, but as we are not discussing Stieltjes, we don't have to see it. Essentially, we can, if you can consider Stieltjes integral also, you can kind of even now see that integration can be made into summation. So we can see summation as some kind of integration. I mean, not just, what's that called? Restricting or approximating, it's actual equal to integration. But it's okay, we don't really need that. Okay, so fine. Oh, okay, so we did till here. So let's just do one or two problems and see some Riemann integrable and non-integrable functions. Okay, so we didn't see all the classes of Riemann integrable functions, my bad. Okay, so we saw that continuous functions are Riemann integrable, monotone functions are Riemann integrable, and of course, the properties of Riemann integration and what you can do, some operations using Riemann integrability to say that some, I mean, operation after some operation, you can again make some Riemann integral functions. Okay, now you may not need continuity at all points. Even if a function is continuous, except at some finitely many points, you still have a Riemann integrability. So the theorem is this. So if f is continuous in AB except at finitely many points, okay, let f be continuous in AB except at finite, implies f is Riemann integrable. So idea is this. Okay, so I suppose you already know this. So I'll just state one more theorem and give the idea of both of the theorems together. So second one is of course more powerful than the first one. So this theorem is again, let f be continuous in AB except for countably many points implies is Riemann integral. So essentially, first one is very simpler form of the second one. So second one just says that if f is continuous except at finitely many points, you actually have the function to be Riemann integrable. Okay, now we'll see why it would happen. Actually, there's a higher class of functions, and that class will entirely, I mean, that will just entirely fully categorize the functions which are Riemann integrable. So we won't go there because I'm not sure if we have seen that concept. So anyway, it's just okay. So the idea is this. So what do we do for continuity? What did we do for continuity? All we did is use the what's that called? Uniform continuity of f. That's what we did if the function is continuous. So in case of finitely many points, what are we gonna do? We are gonna choose those points. Okay, so you have this finitely many points, and in a partition, I'm gonna make the partition with these points with the discontinuity extremely small. Okay, so if I make this extremely small, then I can kind of say that in these x's, I mean in these partition parts, I can kind of bound the function, right? It will be capital Mi minus small mi. I can kind of bound it as maxima and minima of the function. I can just give us big bound and use, by making the interval length very small, I can make it like epsilon by, let's say, if there are 4 points, then let's say epsilon by 8. I mean, I'll just multiply this with some, I mean, I'll make the interval length some very small delta such that this number will be less than, say, epsilon by 8 for each of these points. So what will happen? This will essentially give that these bad intervals will only add up to, will only contribute something like epsilon by 2 in our summation. So everywhere else we have the function to be continuous. So we have uniform continuity, very nice things. So essentially I can bound that place with again epsilon by 2. I mean, there we have everything nice. So I can nicely bound it. So this is what we are going to do. So this 8 is just, entirely subjective. So I just randomly said that. The point is we can make the interval length very small so that we can bound it nicely. We can give it a bound. We can keep that in control. That's all. So in case we have infinitely many points, not infinitely, my bad, countably many points, then what will you do? Again, you see, our idea will be the same. So at each point, we cannot do anything about the, you see, it's just this. What is LPF or UPF? UPF minus LPF. What is this? This is just this, right? Summation over mi minus small mi times delta xi. So I want the total sum to be very small, right? So there are two things which we can do for each of the component. What is each component? Each component is small mi minus capital Mi times delta xi. So here, for making this small, I can either control this and make it to be very small, or I can control this and make it to be very small, right? Due to uniform continuity, I can actually make the partition to be small enough so that I can control this, right? I can make this to be very less, this to be less than, let's say, epsilon by whatever, b by a or whatever, right? If I can do that, I mean, this is what we did in continuity. In that case, I can take this common and then I have summation delta xi and we are done, right? But in case of discontinuity, if we have discontinuous points in this, of course, then we cannot. So in case of discontinuity, we cannot control capital Mi minus small mi, right? Because jump discontinuities may give a very big jumps. So what can we do? In that case, we just control the small xi part. In that case, we control delta xi. I mean, if we have very big discontinuity, we'll just put that into very small interval. Okay, someone said anything? Okay, someone raised a hand. Hello, Arya Prasad, right? You have a doubt or was it accidental?
No, sir, it was accidental.
Okay, fine. Okay, so that's the idea. So in case we have uncountably many, if we have countable number of discontinuities, we are again going to control delta xi, but we choose them in such a way that all these delta xi, the length of all these delta xi will be negligible. So if x if the discontinuity points are in intervals, let's say xj comma xj plus 1. So we are assuming the partition such that the discontinuous points are in the interval. We won't take it as endpoints. We'll take it as interior points of xj plus 1. Assume this is true. Then what are we going to do? We'll make it such that summation delta xj is less than some epsilon by 2 or something like that. Not exactly epsilon by 2, but some eta such that whatever the bound of function is. So let's say capital M minus small m times eta. So this I can bound by epsilon by 2, something like this. Essentially, we'll just bound it in very nice way. So for example, if I want to make it into eta, I'll put the first discontinuous point at an interval with the length, I mean xj my xj comma xj plus 1 such that interval, the length of this will be something like epsilon. I mean, if I want the total sum to be eta, then I'll take eta by 2. The next I'll take it by, next one I'll take it as eta by 4. Next interval length I'll take it as eta by 8. And this will sum up to eta, right? I mean, this 1 by 2 power n summation is a convergence sequence. So I can actually bound it. This is the idea that we use for bounding things with countably many discontinuous points. Right. Now let's see some very first example of a function. I mean, till now we were discussing things which were not Riemann integrable, and we have only 15 minutes left. So I'll come to some functions. I mean, some examples of functions, and you can see why they are integrable or not integrable. So first one, I'll give a non-example, which is a function which is not Riemann integrable and which is well known, which is just characteristic function of let's say rationals in, let's say 0, 1. Okay, so this function is not Riemann integrable because upper sum will not be equal to lower sum. Why? Everywhere the upper sum will be 1 and lower sum will be 0. So 1 not equal to 0, which will show that characteristic function of rationals is not Riemann integrable. And this you can kind of see it, right? Because I mean, you can see that this characteristic functions of rationals, of course, doesn't come under any of the things that we saw to be Riemann integral. For example, it's not a monotone function, it's not continuous, it doesn't have, I mean, it have more than finitely many discontinuities, it have more than countably many discontinuities. In fact, it is discontinuous at each point, right? It's an everywhere discontinuous function. So here you have this to be not Riemann integrable. Now you have a nice function which is Thomae's functions. So this function is actually continuous in every irrationals and discontinuous at every rationals. This function comes out to be Riemann integrable. So the function is defined like this. So f of x equal to, let's say 0 if x is irrational. I mean, if a function is essentially defined in 0, 1 or any interval, it doesn't matter. Yeah, let's say 0, 1. And f of x is defined as 1 by n if x can be written as m by n in lowest form. M by n with m comma n, GCD of m comma n equals 1. So if you look at this function, you can see that this function is actually discontinuous at every rational point. Why? At every rational points, let R be rational, then I can find the sequence of irrational points xi which converges to R, right? So at R, what is the function value? F of R is sum 1 by n, which is not equal to 0. But we know that f of xi is always equal to 0. Right? So f of R is not equal to limit of f of xi, so it is not continuous at rational points. So of course it's a function which is discontinuous at rational points. Now you may think that so what, it may be continuous at irrationals too, right? But actually it happens that it is continuous at every irrational. It is continuous at a very irrational point. So the idea of it is this: so you consider any irrational point and consider any small neighborhood, then what is it? We can actually find points with large m and n, such that there is m by n and m and n to be with GCD1 to be inside this interval. This is a nice use of density of rationals. Okay. So due to this, I can say that there are here the function value will be 1 by n, right? With very large n, 1 by n is very near to 0. So due to this, it actually happens that function is actually continuous at every rational point. Okay, so you have a function which is continuous, discontinuous only at countably many points. Although irrationals are kind of dense, but it's still countable. Hence, you can actually see that Thomae's function is actually Riemann integrable, and its Riemann integral will be equal to 0 because mostly it is 0. So you can see that the function value will be equal to 0. So okay, good. Now the time is almost done, so I'll just give you one more example. So this is something that you may or may not have seen. I hope that you would have seen this set. So this C I call as Cantor set. Okay, so Cantor set is a set which we define as a limit of functions like this. So you consider the set 0, 1, interval 0, 1. And at first step, you just remove the middle 2/3, middle 1/3, and you are left with these two intervals. And in the second step, what do we do? The remaining intervals, you remove the middle 1/3. So these parts we remove. So you get this and this. Okay, so iteratively at each step, whatever interval is remaining, you just remove the middle third of that, and whatever is the limit of that set, that is what we call Cantor set. It's actually a very it have a very nice properties. So one of the properties is that it is uncountable. C is uncountable. And if you have seen the properties open and closed and seen topology, then you can see that it is actually closed set and perfect set. Very nice properties. Okay, so the point is this is uncountable. Now, till now we have seen that a function is Riemann integrable if it is at most if it have countably many discontinuities, right? But we'll actually see that for this function, let f be the characteristic function of C, which is essentially to say that f of x equal to 1 if x in C is 0 if x not in C. Of course, f is a function from 0, 1 to R. 0, 1 to R. Then f is Riemann integrable. So this may seem a bit counterintuitive because you have uncountably many discontinuities in this. So you can see that it is only discontinuous at the points of Cantor set. Everywhere else it is actually continuous. Okay, because you cannot really use the points of Cantor set to give a limit of outside set because it's a closed set. Okay, so essentially what I'm trying to say is, although this have uncountably many discontinuities, the function is still remain integrable. So with this, I'll just end my session. It's easy to prove. Okay, it's actually you use each step, and in each step you will say that in these, I mean, whatever is left over, you take that as partition points and then do it. So that's how we do it. I'm not gonna do it because I don't have much time. So I'll end it here. So if you have any doubts, you can ask. By 10 minutes maybe. Okay, let me tell one more thing. Although this is may not be in your syllabus, still I am just saying. So, if we say that f is Riemann integrable, f is Riemann integrable, if and only if f is discontinuous only in a set of measure 0. So this you may not have seen, measure 0 set. If you have not seen it, forget about it. If you have seen it, this is how you characterize Riemann integrable functions. And the point is, Cantor set have measure 0. Okay, so any questions?
Yeah, thank you, Hari.
Yes.
Dear students, these sessions, even though up to this may not be in your degree syllabus, but you will have to study all this in your first year MSc itself.
Okay,
So have
this
any-
is not in MS syllabus?
Yeah, it is there, but they are using only that type of Riemann tagged partition. With that idea, they are building up the theory.
Oh, is that so?
Not-
But last time when I took the class, they told it is LPF and UPF, not the tag partition.
Yeah, sir. Okay, some universities it may be, yeah,
Okay,
they
okay,
may
okay,
follow
fine.
some other ways.
Okay, okay.
Okay, anyway, in your MSc, first year MSc itself, you have to study the Riemann stages integration. So at that time, you'll get a more idea about these things. Dear students, if you have any doubts to ask, you can do it now.
Yeah, I had some problems also, but yeah, now that we don't have time, I'll just skip it.
Time is almost.
Yeah.
Yes,
Hello,
almost- yeah.
Yeah, yes.
So my name is Adira. I'm a third student in Government College, Calicut, Arts and College. So your session was very informative. I had a good set of examples. I wasn't able to follow much, but I will look upon those examples.
Actually, I didn't give any example, right? Only in the end, I gave 3 examples. Okay, but still, thanks. Okay.
Yeah, I got many points and many things to look upon. It was very informative. Thank you, sir. Expect many more classes from you.
Okay, thank you, Arpita. Okay, any others? If you have some comments to the class, you can do it. You want to comment?
So,
Yes.
Hi, Sri Lakshmi.
yeah. So I'm Sri Lakshmi and I'm a MSc student at GUSAT. So your class was really nice. Actually, some of the concepts were new to me, but I was able to follow because you explained in detail, and the explanation, the way of explanation was also very nice. Thank you so much, sir.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Dear students, feel free to speak. You can ask anything about. You can ask about ISR Tirupati. Okay, I think almost all of us are Malayali students only there now. I think. So you can,
Oh.
even if you want, you can talk in Malayalam also. No problem.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
Hi.
I'm Ari Prasad. I'm from Calcutta University. I'm just joined the for MSc. As Sri Lakshmi said, some of the topics were new to me, but I was able to follow you. Thank you for your class. It was really informative. Thank you.
So I think we can wind up here. So thank you, Hari. Let us wind up here.
Okay.
I will contact you. Okay.
Okay. Okay, bye. Okay, thanks.